In the blood of modern Punjabis lies a puzzle, strands of DNA that never should have met, unless history itself is wrong. For generations, Punjab's identity has been told in a straight line, a proud North Indian heartland, shaped by its rivers, fields and faith. But when scientists began decoding the Punjabi genome, the results overturned centuries of assumption. According to the 1000 Genomes Project 2025, Punjabis are among the most West Eurasian shifted people in all of South Asia, second only to the Pathans. Genetically, they lean closer to parts of Eastern Europe and Central Asia than to some communities just a few hundred kilometres east. The surprise didn't stop there. Deep genetic sequencing revealed that Punjab's ancestry is not a single origin story, but a 5-part fusion spanning tens of thousands of years. It begins with ancient ancestral South Indian hunter-gatherers, AASI, whose presence here reaches back over 40,000 years. Then came Neolithic Iranian farmers, arriving around 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, carrying the earliest seeds of agriculture into the Indus basin. After 2000 BCE, a third wave thundered in, the Indo-Aryan steppe herders from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, bringing with them R1A-Z93Y DNA haplogroups and elements of the Proto-Indo-European language family. Later, Middle Eastern traders and settlers from Persia and Arabia left their mark, followed, unexpectedly, by East Asian lineages, from the Scythians, Huns and Mongols, between the 2nd century BCE and 13th century CE. Every one of these migrations left measurable genetic signatures, haplogroup R1A surging as high as 35 to 47% in Punjabi males, haplogroup J2, a Middle Eastern marker, at roughly 24%. Even rare East Asian haplogroups C and O can be found in small numbers, like faint fingerprints of forgotten warriors. Visualize it. A DNA double helix flowing like Punjab's 5 rivers, twisting into Indus Valley seals, morphing into Greek drachmas, and riding forward on Mongol war horses. This land has been a migration highway for millennia, and yet one thread refuses to be explained. Because buried in Punjabi DNA is a mysterious sub-haplogroup found in certain communities, absent from known local lineages, unrelated to steppe, Middle Eastern or Indus ancestry. It is a ghost lineage, woven deep into the genome with no recorded migration to account for it. And that leaves only one question. Who brought it here? And why? The answer begins 5,000 years ago, in a land called Sapta Sindhu. The 5 rivers carved a living map across the plains, and along their banks rose cities with straight roads, brick houses, and water that ran through the walls. Indus Valley Civilization, circa 3000 to 1500 BCE, not a rumour, but a grid you can still trace in Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro and the Punjab heartland. These were not wandering tribes. They were engineers, farmers, traders, moving copper and shell, baking seals that spoke without words. But the clue to our ghost lineage does not start in a museum, it starts in a cell. In 2017, a Punjabi mtDNA study flagged a rare maternal line, sub-haplogroup M52B1, defined by 16223T, 16275G, 16438A, concentrated in the Gujar caste. The signal resurfaced in 2024 discussions as more Punjabi samples were added. It did not match the common local patterns. It did not ride in on steppe horses. It did not track with later Middle Eastern arrivals. It sat there, quiet, persistent, like a signature no one could forge. To place that signature, we went to Rakigahi. In 2019, ancient DNA from that site delivered a shock, a mix of AASI, ancient ancestral South Indian, plus Iranian-related Neolithic farmer ancestry, and no steppe component. In plain words, before 2000 BCE, before the Indo-Aryan waves, Punjab already carried a deep fusion. Local hunter-gatherers braided with migrants from the Iranian plateau, who brought agriculture circa 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. The genome matched the streets, planned cities, storage granaries, long-distance trade toward Mesopotamia, and dairy traditions that would echo for millennia. Listen to the plains. You can hear wheels in the night, boats on the Indus, cattle in the courtyards. You can feel the pressure of time, because the M52B1 line, the one that bothered our maps, fits best in a world where maternal ancestries travelled slowly, by marriage, by settlement, by generations, not by conquest. It hints at women moving with the earliest farmers, threading the Iranian story into Punjab soil long before bronze blades flashed on the horizon. And yet the maps record glory, not endings. Around 1900 to 1500 BCE, the city's empty, floods and droughts wrestle the rivers, trade routes fade. But the bodies do not vanish, the blood does not forget. The genome keeps the minutes others burn. And then, without warning, this civilization collapsed. But their bloodlines, they didn't vanish. Here's the shock you weren't expecting. The Indus people, whose cities fell into silence nearly 3,800 years ago, are still here. Not in their bricks, not in their pottery, but in us. Modern genetic research has revealed something extraordinary. Punjabis today carry one of the strongest direct continuities with Indus Valley Civilization DNA in all of South Asia. The turning point came in 2019 when scientists sequenced DNA from a 4,500-year-old skeleton at Arakigari, one of the largest IVC sites. The result rewrote migration history. The genome contained ancient ancestral South Indian hunter-gatherer lineage, AASI, fused with Neolithic Iranian farmer ancestry, but zero Indo-Aryan steppe DNA. That absence is crucial. It means the great wave of steppe herders arriving after 2000 BCE came too late to shape the genetic core of the IVC people. And yet, this genetic signature is still alive in Punjab. When researchers ran modern Punjabi samples through the same comparative analysis, the continuity was unmistakable. The farmers who sowed wheat along the Ravi, who raised cattle in the shadow of Harappa's walls, are our biological kin. It's not just in our blood, it's in the land's crop cycles, still matched to ancient harvest calendars. It's in our dairy obsession, a direct inheritance from communities that lived on milk, yogurt and butter 5 millennia ago. Even certain linguistic roots in Punjabi, words for tools, for rivers, whisper in the voice of that vanished world. Think about what that means. Empires came. Achaemenids, Greeks, Kushans, Mughals, each leaving marks on culture and politics. But beneath all those layers, the oldest chapter stayed open, carried quietly inside living bodies. And yet, there is an irony sharper than any sword. This unbroken survival, this rarest of human continuities, would soon be fractured. Not by invasion, not by famine, but by walls we built ourselves, invisible yet absolute. Walls of caste. They were not walls you could see, but they were stronger than any fort the Mughals ever built. In Punjab, they decided who you could love, who you could marry, and even whose shadow could fall across your doorstep. And for centuries they were never questioned. Imagine this, a land open to the world, where armies marched in from Persia, Central Asia and the Himalayas. Yet inside its own villages, the bloodlines flowed in narrow, guarded channels. This was endogamy, the ancient code that demanded marriage within one's caste, generation after generation. It wasn't just culture, it was a genetic law, obeyed for over 1,000 years. The result? Entire genetic signatures frozen in time. Among upper castes, the DNA still carries steppe-heavy ANI ancestry, the same Indo-Aryan imprint brought by horse-riding migrants after 2000 BCE. In contrast, many Dalit communities hold a far greater proportion of ancient ancestral South Indian AASI heritage, the deep original layer of the subcontinent's genome. The numbers don't lie. 85% of Sikh Punjabis today genetically cluster within upper caste profiles, almost untouched by Dalit DNA. Between these extremes, certain groups, like the Shamars, act as rare genetic bridges, their DNA a blend that sits midway between the two worlds. It's a human mosaic, but one where the tiles rarely touch. And this is the paradox. Punjab's geography made it the most invaded, most travelled, most culturally blended land in South Asia. Yet its internal social code locked its gene flow tighter than mountain valleys far to the north. Side by side in the same fields, on the same battle lines, the people of Punjab lived together. But their blood never mixed. These invisible walls endured every empire. The Achaemenids couldn't break them. The Mughals couldn't erase them. The British Raj couldn't dismantle them. And then came one year. One moment in history when a line was drawn, not around castes, but across a map. And those invisible walls shattered overnight. The year was 1947, and what rose from the ruins would split Punjab's DNA in ways no one had seen before. August 1947, the month the map caught fire, the month the land of 5 rivers was cut in two with a single stroke of ink. But here's the paradox. While Punjab bled, its DNA stayed the same. Partition was the largest forced migration in human history. 14 million people, Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims, pushed across new borders overnight. Carts loaded with children and grain, trains arriving full of corpses, caravans stretching beyond the horizon. Villages emptied. Cities changed their names. Faith became a passport or a death sentence. And yet, beneath all that chaos, the genetic code was unmoved by religion. In the eyes of DNA, a Sikh from Amritsar, a Hindu from Ludhiana, and a Muslim from Lahore were almost indistinguishable. They carried the same ancient markers, R1A, the steppe-born Y-DNA line that rode in over 3,000 years ago, J2, the Middle Eastern signature of Neolithic farmers, L, tied to the earliest Indus Valley settlers. Partition had torn apart homes, but it couldn't erase the bloodlines that ran through them. There were differences, subtle but measurable. On the Indian side of Punjab, genomes tilted slightly more toward steppe Indo-European ancestry. Across the border in Pakistani Punjab, there was a faint but notable lean toward Zagros Iran-related ancestry, a whisper from the Neolithic farmers who crossed the Iranian plateau 10,000 years ago. But these were shades of the same colour. Imagine it, a family split by the Wagah border. One branch in Amritsar, one in Lahore. Different flags, different prayers, different futures. But if you traced their paternal and maternal haplogroups, you would find the same deep ancestry, the same 1,000-year-old genetic threads running unbroken from one side to the other. And yet, while the border didn't divide their DNA in 1947, something else began to stir. In one half of Punjab, a quiet custom, invisible to census records, hidden from history books, began to slowly shift the genetic profile. It was not war, it was not a famine, it was a marriage. And in just 2 generations, it started to rewrite the DNA of an entire people. Here's where the story takes a turn few expect. In parts of Punjab, especially across the border in Kabirwala, the pattern wasn't random, it was deliberate. Generations of families choosing to marry within their own bloodline, not just the same caste, not just the same village, but the same extended family. And in Kabirwala, the numbers are staggering. 77% of marriages happen between cousins. On the surface, this is not new. Records from colonial Punjab's agrarian surveys in the late 19th century mention the practice openly. In an economy where land was survival, marriage wasn't a love story. It was a contract to keep fields intact. Cousin unions ensured farmland stayed in the family, preventing it from splitting into smaller, less profitable parcels. But DNA tells a deeper story. Scientists studying Punjabi genomes noticed an unusually high level of homozygosity, stretches of identical DNA inherited from both parents. In genetic terms, it's a signature of close relative marriage over many generations. The effects can be double-edged. On one hand, it can amplify the presence of rare genetic disorders, metabolic conditions, hearing loss, certain blood diseases, which otherwise remain hidden. On the other, it creates ultra-distinct genetic clusters, so sharply defined that you can sometimes pinpoint a person's ancestry not just to a region, but to a single extended family network. Think about that. A population already shaped by ancient migrations, already layered with Indus, Steppe, and Middle Eastern ancestry, now forming tight, sealed genetic circles in the modern age. The practice isn't uniform. Urban centres break the pattern more than rural ones. But in many villages, it's as binding as any ancient law, and it has been happening for centuries, quietly reinforcing invisible genetic borders long after partitions lines were drawn on a map. This is where culture and biology meet, in a way history books rarely acknowledge. A tradition meant to protect family legacy is also sculpting the future genetic landscape of Punjab. But not all threads in Punjabi DNA were woven through farming fields and marriage alliances. Some came on horseback. Some arrived with arrows in their quivers and the steppe wind at their backs. But not from the west, because another hidden strand in Punjab's DNA comes from warriors who rode in from the east. They came with arrows and left their faces in our children. For centuries, Punjab's story has been told as a meeting place of the south and the west, Indus farmers, Iranian traders, steppe herders. But deep inside the genome, there's a faint, almost ghost-like signal from the Far East, a trace of people who didn't build here, didn't farm here. They conquered, burned, and moved on. Yet some stayed. The first came around 150 BCE, the Scythians, nomads from the eastern steppes of Central Asia. They swept through the passes, their cavalry fast and silent, leaving coins and weapons scattered in the soil. Then, in the 5th century CE, the Huns descended, breaking empires and reshaping kingdoms from Central Asia to northern India. Their raids left more than ruins, they left blood. But the most famous, and feared, came in the 13th century. The Mongols, riders who could loose 6 arrows before your first hit the ground. They stormed through Punjab's plains in wave after wave, armies under the banners of Genghis Khan's descendants. Their rule here was brief, but their legacy wasn't. Today, geneticists can still detect it. A minor East Asian component in Punjabi DNA. Haplogroups C and O, rare in South Asia, appear like faint fingerprints of those ancient riders. The percentage is small, but it's enough to tell a story written in more than ink and stone. Even the human face remembers. In certain villages, you'll see epicanthic folds in the eyes, jawlines with sharper angles, phenotypic echoes of ancestors who came from lands where the winters were long and the grass never stopped moving. You might not notice it at first, but the genome does. And this is where the contradiction lies. For all the devastation these eastern invasions brought, they also became part of the Punjabi genetic fabric, a sliver of the East embedded forever in the West. But not all outsiders came from the steppes. Some didn't ride horses across mountains. Some came under sails, carried by winds from the heart of the Mediterranean. And when they arrived, they brought a connection to a world even older than the Indus itself. A stranger's face, carved into stone 2,000 years ago, still lives in the blood of Punjabis today. It is 326 BCE. The air is heavy with the heat of summer. Dust coils above the Indus River as the first glint of bronze appears on the horizon. They march in perfect formation, shields flashing in the sun, war elephants swaying under exotic banners. At their head rides a young king whose name would become legend, Alexander of Macedon. History says his campaign in Punjab was brief, but the genome tells a subtler story. Among Punjabi men today, scientists have found a rare marker. Haplogroup was present in around 2%, yet almost absent in the rest of South Asia. Its roots lie far to the west, in the Balkans and southeastern Europe, exactly where Alexander's army began its march. In the language of genetics, even 2% is not a whisper. It's a traceable inheritance. Alexander didn't take all his soldiers home. Many stayed behind, some as part of garrisons, others becoming citizens of the Indo-Greek kingdoms that emerged after his death. For centuries, Punjab's Gandhara region became a cultural crossroads. Stone Buddhas wore flowing Greek robes. Carvings showed hair in tight Hellenistic curls. Coins carried Greek script on one side and Indian gods on the other. Artifacts that spoke of a land where two worlds merged. Over time, the Greek bloodline blended, diluted by waves of other migrations, yet its fingerprints remain, faint but undeniable. It's not just in the DNA, it's in the art, the ruins, the very names of forgotten cities. A brief invasion became an eternal footnote in Punjab's genetic code. But here's the twist. This story isn't just about what the past left behind. Punjab's DNA isn't a frozen archive. It's alive, changing, preparing for challenges yet to come, and hidden in its double helix are clues scientists believe could forecast the very future of its people. What if your ancestry could tell you your fate? Not your past, not where you came from, but what will happen to your body, your health, your life. This isn't science fiction. It's the work of geneticists scanning Punjabi DNA and finding markers that don't just whisper of history, they shout warnings about the years ahead. One of the most striking is tied to chromosome 13, a variation in the SGCG gene. In Punjabis, it appears at higher frequencies than in almost any other South Asian group, and it is linked to an increased risk of type 2 diabetes, a disease that ancient farmers in the Indus Valley could not have imagined, yet one that stalks their descendants today. Then there's the APOA1 variant, a subtle shift in a gene controlling lipid metabolism. It's a marker for higher heart disease risk, and studies in Punjabi populations show it may be part of why cardiovascular issues strike earlier here than in many other groups. It's as if the genetic adaptations that once fueled survival, efficient energy storage, rapid fat use in times of scarcity, have turned into liabilities in a modern world of abundance. Even vitamin D metabolism tells a story. Variants affecting how Punjabis process sunlight into vitamin D remain common, a legacy of ancestors adapted to outdoor farming under intense sun. In today's urban indoor life, that adaptation can flip, contributing to deficiencies, weakening bones, affecting immunity. But perhaps the most remarkable is the lactase persistence allele, LCT13910*, found in roughly 63% of Punjabis. This single genetic change allows adults to digest milk without discomfort. It's a living echo of ancient pastoralism, when herders on the plains survived droughts by drinking the milk of their cattle. That same adaptation still shapes Punjabi diets today, from lassi in the summer heat to ghee-laden roti in winter. Here's the twist. These markers don't just predict disease or resilience. They are a genetic map of ancient survival strategies, still alive, still influencing lives, but now playing out in a modern world their creators could never have imagined. And Punjabi DNA isn't staying in Punjab. These same markers, these ancient fingerprints, are now scattered across the globe, carried by migrations that have reshaped entire communities thousands of miles away. And in those far-off lands, Punjabi DNA is rewriting new stories altogether. 1,000 years ago, long before borders carved up the map, long before trains carried migrants across continents, the first great exodus began. Caravans rolled out of Punjab, not for trade, not for war, but for survival. Entire communities moved west, crossing deserts and mountains, vanishing into the horizon. For centuries, their trail went cold. Historians argued over where they went, or if they ever truly existed. But DNA doesn't forget. In the genetic profiles of modern Roma people in Europe, scientists have found unmistakable markers, echoes of Punjab carried across the centuries. 41% of Roma men belong to the same R haplogroup common in Punjab. Another 22% carry J haplogroups, tracing back to the Near East, but embedded in Punjabi lineages for millennia. It is as if pieces of Punjab's genome were picked up, carried across continents, and woven into the genetic fabric of an entirely new people. But the journey didn't end in medieval Europe. In the last 2 centuries, Punjab's genes have taken flight on ships and planes, scattering across the globe. Farmers sailed to East Africa to work in railway camps. Labourers crossed the Pacific to Canada, braving hostile immigration laws. Families boarded steamers to Britain, finding work in Birmingham's factories. Each wave of migration left its mark, blending Punjabi DNA into new populations, creating children with genetic maps that read like epic travelogues. Even now, when a Punjabi marries outside the community in London, Melbourne or Vancouver, those ancient markers, from Indus Valley farmers, steppe herders, East Asian warriors and Mediterranean sailors, mix with entirely new genetic landscapes. The result is a living experiment in evolution, unfolding in real time. But here's the truth. We still don't know the full story. Because not all of Punjab's DNA is in its people today. Some of it is still hidden in places no one has touched for thousands of years. And scientists believe that the biggest discovery, the one that could rewrite everything we know about Punjabi ancestry, may still be lying underground, waiting to be found. Somewhere under Punjab's soil. The next twist is waiting, not in a book, not in an archive, but in the bones of people who lived and died thousands of years before our names existed. Punjab has always been more than just land. It's been a living archive, recording the footsteps of every migrant who crossed its rivers, every conqueror who planted their flag, every farmer who tilled its earth. But archives are only as complete as the pages we've turned, and there are still chapters buried deep. Archaeologists in the last decade have uncovered only a fraction of what lies beneath. Sites along the Gagahakra riverbed, dry now but once flowing, hold traces of settlements older than the known Indus Valley Civilization. Pottery shards, beads, bricks that don't match any recorded culture. If the skeletal remains there yield DNA, they could shift the Indo-Aryan migration timeline by centuries, or prove that some of our oldest migration theories are wrong entirely. Imagine it, a genome emerging from the soil that carries no steep ancestry at all, or one that links directly to Central Asian herders before they were thought to arrive. A sequence that doesn't just fill a gap in history, but blows open the walls we've built around it. The tools now exist to make this happen. Next generation sequencing, isotope analysis, even ancient protein studies, all can speak for the dead in ways stone, inscriptions never could. Every dig, every fragment is a chance to hear voices silenced for millennia. But this is the part that chills me. Every year, more of these sites are lost, swallowed by urban expansion, destroyed by unrecorded construction, and with them, stories we will never hear again. Because Punjabi DNA is not a relic, it's an unfinished epic. And whether its next chapter is found in a lab, in a grave, or in the blood of a child yet to be born, the story is still being written,